Heart-thump time once again in launch control. Leo Krupp and astronaut Bonnie Dunbar, what do you make of this? It's said to be a slight delay and not very serious, but any time that clock doesn't resume the countdown as we expect, I always begin to think, uh-oh, perhaps here we go again with another scrub. What do you think?
I don't think it's an orbiter problem. I think that they're looking at range safety, perhaps a signal carrier, to make sure that they have two. I don't know that we've talked about range safety before, but one of the aspects of guaranteeing safety to the crew and to people in the area should we have a problem is that we need to signal the crew if they need to eject, and if the vehicle is possibly out of control, that we can destroy it. And that's what range safety is really all about. So they're verifying that those carriers' signals are all correct.
But Leo Krupp, I realize we're well ahead of ourselves in the sense that there is no particularly serious problem that we know about other than the clock has not started to run, that they want to check this range control safety. But Bonnie Dunbar just said something about possibly destroying the spacecraft. It's something we don't often talk about. But under a worst-case scenario, the spacecraft might have to be destroyed. But the astronauts have the capability of getting out of there before that would happen, do they not?
Well, there is a period from liftoff to 25 seconds where there's probably not a satisfactory escape envelope. But after that, if the vehicle should deviate from its trajectory where it becomes a hazard to the local population, then the range safety, as soon as the vehicle gets out of this trajectory, the range safety will light a light in the cockpit telling the crew that they have a range safety arm situation and the vehicle is going to be detonated after a certain time period, and the crew then has the option of either doing a fast separation, which means they could immediately separate the external tank and the solid rocket boosters, or they could eject.
Now, we're told that the voice of launch control will be up in about 10 seconds. Right now, we have a slight delay. We're T-9 and holding. Let's listen to what launch control has to say.
Shuttle launch control at T-9 minutes and holding. Launch Director George Page has checked on a number of problems which had come up during the countdown to determine that there are no constraints at the present time. He has spoken to the launch crew and says, let's take our time. It's been a hard one. Watch all your data, but we're going to do it right. He has spoken to the crew, and he's to Joe Engel and to Dick Truly, and said, we're going to give you a good one. We're in the process now of the test conductor going over the hold criteria with the launch team to let them know what point holds can be called and what the proper procedure is to call that hold. Launch Director George Page has told the launch team to take their time and do it right. We're standing by now to get word of the point at which we will be picking up at the T-9 minutes point. This is shuttle launch control.
Well, the tension grows in launch control as at the T-9 and holding mark they continue to hold. No indication of how serious the problem may be. They did make an effort there to reassure both the astronauts, everyone working in launch control, and yes, those of you in the listening and watching audience, that things continue to look overall pretty good, as was being explained earlier by my helpers here, Leo Krupp and astronaut Bonnie Dunbar, that the indication is that the problem has something to do with the range safety, that is the safety in the immediate area of Launch Pad 39A. More about that in a few moments, but right now I must say that our CBS News coverage of the launch of Space Shuttle Columbia will continue after this pause for station identification. Tension on the launch pad at the Kennedy Space Center in Florida. Isn't there always tension just before a launch, but special tension at this moment because the clock has stopped, T-9 and holding. That if everything had been going exactly according to plan, that clock would already be running. It isn't running, partly because of a difficulty on the safety range in the immediate area of the launch pad. A voice of launch control will be up in a few seconds. Again, let's take a listen.
This is shuttle launch control at T-9 minutes and holding. Launch Director George Page has just ordered that the clock will be picked up at 1 minute after 10 Eastern Standard Time this morning. We have just had a check of the various major managers for this morning's launch. Norm Carlson has conducted that check, and all of the managers have said they are ready to pick up at the proper time. The launch director, George Page, has just asked Deke Slayton, the OFT launch manager, if he is go, and Deke Slayton has said he is go for launch. We're about 2 minutes away from picking up the countdown at the T-minus 9-minute point, which would result in a launch at 10:10 a.m. this morning. This is Shuttle Launch Control.
Caution, the byword, as George Page re-emphasizing what he said a few minutes ago, quote, let's take our time. It's been a hard one, let's do it right, quote unquote, from George Page, who's in charge of the launch. That's what he told the astronauts who were strapped into the cockpit of the orbiter, waiting and eager to get out there, having had their flight scrubbed last week. As you heard, the indication now is the clock at T-minus 9 and holding will be resumed. The running of the clock will start again at just after 10 o'clock Eastern Time, just after the hour coming up. And then the countdown will resume from this T-minus 9 point, hopefully right on down through launch. So Leo Krupp and Bonnie Dunbar, it doesn't look like, whatever the problem was with the range safety officer, that it was a very serious problem, in that every indication is that they will resume that clock, start it running about 2 minutes from now. I do want to say to our audience that once we get very close to launch time and in the post-launch period, we don't intend to say a whole lot. We intend to let the sound and pictures speak for themselves. We do want to prepare you for what you will be seeing, because on a good weather day like today, you should be able to see quite a lot. But first, let's listen again to launch control.
This is Shuttle Launch Control at T-minus 9 minutes and holding, just 15 seconds away from picking up the clock at the T-minus 9-minute point. All of the major managers have indicated they are ready to go, and we are at T-minus 9 minutes and counting. The launch sequence are now being controlled by the ground launch sequencer from now up to the T-minus 31-second point, when they'll switch to the onboard redundant set launch sequencer. The ground launch sequencer is part of the launch processing system and operates by relaying commands to the orbiter's onboard computers, which then reports back to the launch processing system that the commands have been executed.
And the clock is running.
The primary job of the computers is to check that all of the launch commit criteria are being met, such as propellant loads, temperatures, pressures, and other measurements. The chase aircraft have been launched from Patrick Air Force Base to take part in the activities of this morning's launch. T-minus 8 minutes, 10 seconds, and counting.
Well, good news as the clock starts out of that T-minus 9 and holding pattern that it had been in for quite a few minutes, and the clock is now running again toward a launch. Now, briefly, this is what you're going to see as we get closer down to launch time. You can see in this live picture from Launch Pad 39A, the orbiter on the back of the external fuel tank with the solid fuel rockets to either side, poised for the launch. If there is no further hold, and no further hold is planned, we've been through all of the planned holds now, that if all goes well, everybody here with their fingers crossed hoping that it does, the clock will continue to roll right down to launch time. Now, these are the things to look for at launch. Just at the moment, the access arm, which has been right up against the orbiter, you can see just to the left of center of your screen, you see the access arm, which is up against the orbiter, will be in the process of being pulled back now. That's the scene from inside the access arm area. The hatch is closed. Now the access arm begins to pull away. What you see up there is roughly what the astronauts are seeing from their cockpit. You can see how far they can see out into the distance. The access arm pulling slowly away. In case of any emergency, it could go back up to the hatch and help get the astronauts out. But the clock is rolling down toward launch, 6:37, 6:36. The access arm moved away now from the orbiter. This is a high shot looking down that access arm. You can see how it moves to its left to go up against the orbiter, moving now to its right away from the orbiter. And now the two astronauts alone in the orbiter, the access arm pulled away from the side of their spaceship. As the clock moves down to the 6-minute and rolling mark. Now we want to show you very briefly, using our model, what to look for as we get down close to launch. The orbiter itself, the two solid rocket boosters, the large external fuel tank, liquid hydrogen and oxygen. At launch, you will see the engines of the orbiter itself. They'll be cranked up. The solid rocket boosters will crank up. Once they crank up and get going, there's no turning back from that point on. Now, once launch is effected, watch, and you should be able to see it. Watch the spacecraft will turn. Shortly after launch, you should be able to see that. You also may be able to see the two solid rocket boosters fall away, leaving the orbiter and the external fuel tank going on out toward space. You should be able to see that shortly after launch.